Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Clovis Brief. I'm your host, and today is Sunday, May 24th, 2026. I hope you're having a restful Memorial Day weekend. Let me tell you what's happening with the weather here in northern Illinois. Right now, it's a cool 55 degrees, feels about the same, and we've got overcast skies with light winds. We had some drizzle overnight, picked up about 0.04 of an inch. Today's high will reach 78 degrees with a low of 54, and we're expecting a bit more drizzle. Tomorrow, Memorial Day itself, we're looking at warmer conditions with a high of 84 and overcast skies. Tuesday stays overcast, reaching 82. Wednesday brings more active weather with showers expected, about 1/3 of an inch of rain and a high of 83. Thursday cools back down to the mid-70s under those persistent overcast conditions. So if you're planning any outdoor Memorial Day activities, tomorrow looks like your best bet before Wednesday's rain moves in. We've got a packed show for you today. We're starting with major breaking news from the White House, where there was a shooting incident just yesterday. We'll cover the ongoing situation with Ukraine facing massive Russian missile attacks on Kyiv, and we'll discuss President Trump's claims about a breakthrough with Iran. Then we'll zoom in on local Chicago and Illinois news before diving into the tech world with some fascinating stories from Microsoft, AMD, and the world of competitive programming. Our security briefing is substantial today with multiple critical vulnerabilities, including active exploitation of Drupal and Trend microsystems. Plus, we'll discuss the ongoing CISA data leak situation. Let's get started. We begin with breaking news from Washington. The Secret Service reports that a suspect is dead and a bystander wounded after gunfire was exchanged near a White House security checkpoint yesterday evening. According to multiple sources including NBC News and ABC News, the incident occurred when an individual approached the checkpoint with a weapon. Secret Service agents engaged the suspect, who was killed. One bystander sustained injuries in the exchange. The White House lawn was immediately cleared and press were rushed inside. This remains a developing situation, and authorities have not yet released the identity of the suspect or detailed the motive. The incident comes amid heightened security concerns in the nation's capital. Turning to international news, Reuters and BBC World are reporting that Ukraine's capital Kyiv was hit by a massive Russian missile and drone attack early Sunday morning. According to Reuters, Russia used hypersonic Orshnik missiles along with ballistic missiles in what's being described as a large-scale coordinated strike. The attack left at least 4 people dead and dozens injured across the city. Ukrainian air defenses were activated throughout the night, with residents reporting explosions across multiple districts. This represents one of the most significant attacks on the capital in recent months. Ukrainian President Zelensky has responded sharply to recent comments from German opposition leader Friedrich Merz, stating that Ukraine has been defending Europe fully, not with half measures, and deserves full voting rights in the European Union. The attack on Kyiv comes as the war enters its 1550th day. President Trump made headlines yesterday by claiming that a deal with Iran, including the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, is largely negotiated. AP News and NPR are reporting on this development. However, Iran quickly pushed back on these claims. According to Reuters World, Iran's government said Trump's assertion about reopening Hormuz is far from reality. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been somewhat more measured, telling Bloomberg that there's been significant progress in talks and suggesting good news may be forthcoming about Hormuz. NPR notes that while Trump is touting a breakthrough, details remain unclear and many questions persist about what exactly has been agreed upon. This comes after weeks of heightened tension following U.S. and Israeli military actions against Iran. GOP Senators Lindsey Graham and Roger Wicker have expressed concerns about reports of a 60-day ceasefire deal, according to The Hill, putting pressure on the Trump administration to provide more transparency about the terms of any agreement. A suicide bombing near a railway track in southwest Pakistan has killed at least 23 people, according to AP News. The attack occurred near Quetta, and authorities are investigating whether it was timed to coincide with a passing train. This is one of the deadliest attacks in Pakistan in recent months and highlights ongoing security challenges in the region. No group has immediately claimed responsibility, though Balochistan province has seen various militant groups operating in the area. In Honduras, AP News reports that gunmen opened fire in two separate attacks, killing at least 25 people. The violence occurred in the coastal areas of Trujillo and Amoa. Authorities are investigating whether the attacks are connected and what motivated the shootings. Honduras has struggled with gang violence and organized crime for years, and this incident represents one of the deadliest episodes of violence in the country this year. There's a developing public health emergency that requires our attention. Ars Technica and BBC News are reporting that the Ebola outbreak in Central Africa is now the third largest recorded outbreak and is spreading rapidly. The situation in Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo has deteriorated significantly. According to AP News and Bloomberg, 18 suspected Ebola patients escaped after a treatment tent was set on fire for a second time in Congo. 3 Red Cross volunteers have died from Ebola, NBC News reports, as the number of cases continues to rise. Medical supplies are running low, flights have been halted to affected areas, and healthcare workers are struggling to contain the outbreak. The World Health Organization is monitoring the situation closely, and there are growing concerns about the outbreak spreading to neighboring countries. This is the most serious Ebola situation since the West African outbreak of 2014 to 2016. Back in the United States, there's a dangerous environmental emergency unfolding in Southern California. PBS NewsHour and AP News report that 40,000 people are under evacuation orders after a chemical storage tank leak. California governor has declared a state of emergency, according to NBC News and BBC News. The incident involves a toxic chemical leak at a storage facility, and crews are racing to contain it before it spreads further. The evacuations cover a significant residential area, and authorities are warning people to stay away from the affected zone. Air quality monitoring is ongoing, and residents are being told to keep windows closed and avoid outdoor activities if they're near the evacuation zone. In political news, The Hill and multiple sources are reporting that Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard has resigned. According to Reddit's politics community, this has generated significant discussion, with over 16,000 upvotes on a megathread about the resignation. Gabbard's tenure was controversial from the start, with critics questioning her past stances on foreign policy and her suitability for the intelligence role. The circumstances of her resignation and who might replace her remain developing stories. The Trump administration is making significant changes to immigration policy. According to NBC News, the administration has upended the green card process, potentially compelling hundreds of thousands of people to leave the United States to apply for their permanent residency. This represents a major shift in how legal immigration is handled and has created uncertainty for many families who are in the middle of the application process. Immigration attorneys are reporting confusion about how the new rules will be implemented and what alternatives might be available for affected applicants. Finally, the Trump Justice Department has scrubbed its website of news releases about January 6 defendants, according to AP News. This move has raised concerns among transparency advocates and legal experts who argue that public records about federal prosecutions should remain accessible. The removal of these documents comes as the administration has established a $1.776 billion fund, which they call an anti-weaponization fund, for people affected by January 6 prosecutions. The Hill reports that this fund is leaving a legal firestorm at the feet of lawmakers, with legal experts questioning the constitutional basis for the settlements. Now let's turn to what's happening closer to home in Chicago and across Illinois. WGN Chicago is reporting on a significant public safety incident. An 18-year-old has been charged in the shooting of former Dolton Mayor Tiffany Henyard's father. The shooting occurred earlier this week, and police have now made an arrest in connection with the case. Details about the motive are still emerging, but the incident has shocked the South suburban community. Henyard, who has been a controversial figure in Dolton politics, has not made extensive public statements about the incident beyond expressing concern for her father's recovery. In Northwest Indiana news, which affects many Chicago area residents, WGN is reporting that a suspect has been charged in connection with the shooting of a deputy in a Northwest Indiana emergency room. The incident occurred when the suspect allegedly opened fire in the hospital emergency department, striking a law enforcement officer. The deputy is reportedly in stable condition. This incident highlights the ongoing concerns about violence in healthcare settings and the dangers faced by law enforcement officers even in what should be secure environments. Hospital administrators are reviewing security protocols in the wake of the shooting. On a more positive note, WGN Chicago reports that family members of fallen service members gathered at Daley Plaza to honor Gold Star families this Memorial Day weekend. The event brought together families who have lost loved ones in military service to remember their sacrifice and support one another. With Memorial Day tomorrow, ceremonies like this are taking place across the Chicago area, reminding us of the true meaning of the holiday beyond barbecues and the unofficial start of summer. There's an important public safety story from the suburbs. WGN is reporting that a family member thwarted a juvenile's alleged plan to carry out a shooting at a suburban elementary school. According to authorities, the family member discovered the plan and immediately contacted police, preventing what could have been a tragedy. The juvenile is now in custody, and police are investigating how the plan was developed and whether the individual had access to weapons. School administrators are working with law enforcement to assess security measures and provide support to the school community. This incident serves as a reminder of the importance of reporting concerning behavior and the role family members play in preventing violence. Reddit's Chicago community has been actively discussing street festivals, with one popular post noting, "You would miss the street fests if they weren't around." With over 800 upvotes, Chicagoans are expressing their appreciation for the neighborhood festivals that define summer in the city. The Belmont Sheffield Music Fest happened yesterday, with WGN reporting on performances including the 4-star brass band. These festivals bring together local businesses, musicians, and neighbors for celebrations of Chicago's diverse communities. As we head into summer, dozens of street fests are scheduled across the city's neighborhoods. Looking at the weather impact on your Sunday plans here in Chicago and northern Illinois, remember we're expecting that high of 78 today with some drizzle possible. If you're heading out to any of the remaining Memorial Day weekend events, tomorrow looks better with drier conditions and warmer temperatures reaching the mid-80s. Just keep Wednesday in mind if you're planning ahead. That's when we'll see more substantial rain moving through. Let's move into technology news, where we have some fascinating stories from across the industry. Ars Technica is reporting on a significant piece of computing history. Microsoft has open-sourced what they're calling the earliest DOS source code discovered to date. This discovery is getting a lot of attention on Hacker News, with over 260 points and 70+ comments. What makes this so interesting is that we're talking about code that predates even the first commercial version of MS-DOS. The source code shows the very foundations of the operating system that would go on to dominate personal computing in the 1980s and much of the 90s. For computer historians and enthusiasts, this is like finding an archaeological artifact. It reveals design decisions, programming techniques, and the constraints developers were working under in the earliest days of microcomputer operating systems. The code is now available for researchers and anyone interested in understanding how operating systems evolved. It's a reminder that even the most advanced technology of today builds on foundations laid decades ago, often by small teams working with extremely limited resources. There's concerning news from AMD about their FPGA development tools. Hacker News has a story with 168 points asking, why is Vivado 2026.1 dropping Linux support for free tier? This is significant for several reasons. Vivado is formerly Xilinx's software suite for designing with FPGAs, which are programmable hardware chips used in everything from telecommunications equipment to research projects. The free version has been essential for hobbyists, students, and small companies experimenting with FPGA technology. Dropping Linux support effectively excludes a large portion of the open-source hardware community and academic users who prefer or require Linux environments. The decision seems particularly puzzling because FPGA development has traditionally had strong Linux support, and many professional workflows depend on it. The Hacker News community is discussing alternatives and expressing frustration that AMD appears to be pushing users toward Windows-only solutions or expensive commercial licenses. This could significantly impact education and innovation in the FPGA space, where accessible tools have been crucial for bringing new people into hardware design. On a more positive note for the open source community, Hacker News is highlighting Silk, an open source cooperative fiber scheduler from ClickHouse. While this is more technical, it's worth understanding because it represents advances in how software handles concurrent operations. Fiber scheduling is about managing lightweight threads of execution more efficiently than traditional operating system threads. ClickHouse, which is known for its high-performance database software, is sharing this technology with the broader community. This kind of contribution helps raise the performance ceiling for many types of applications, particularly those dealing with high concurrency. Think web servers, databases, and real-time data processing systems. The cooperative aspect means that tasks voluntarily yield control rather than being forcibly interrupted, which can lead to more predictable performance. Here's a delightful story from the Damascene community. A programmer has created something called Wake Up 16B, that's 16 bytes, and it has 250 points on Hacker News. To put this in perspective, 16 bytes is an almost impossibly small amount of code. For comparison, a typical sentence in a text file takes more space than that. Yet this programmer managed to create an entire graphical demonstration in just 16 bytes. The detailed write-up explains the extreme optimization techniques used, including exploiting quirks of the x86 processor architecture and making assumptions about the initial state of memory. This is programming as art form, where the challenge isn't just to make something work, but to make it work within absurd constraints. The Damascene has a long history of pushing the boundaries of what's possible with minimal resources, dating back to the early days of home computers when every byte of memory was precious. There's an interesting discussion on Lobstars about whether Jira is Turing complete. This has 64 points and sounds academic, but it touches on something important about modern software tools. Turing completeness is the computer science concept that describes whether a system can theoretically compute anything that's computable, essentially, whether it's a full programming language. The demonstration shows that Jira's workflow system, which most companies use for bug tracking and project management, can actually be configured to perform arbitrary computations. Now, this doesn't mean you should write programs in Jira. It would be absurdly impractical, but it highlights how complex these tools have become. When your project management software is theoretically as powerful as any programming language, you have to wonder if we've made things too complicated. The discussion reflects broader concerns about enterprise software becoming so feature-rich that it's difficult to use effectively. Ars Technica has an update on SpaceX's Starship program. Version 3 of Starship had its first flight and was mostly successful, though still described as a work in progress. This is significant because Starship is intended to be SpaceX's fully reusable heavy-lift rocket system, potentially enabling more affordable space access and supporting missions to the Moon and Mars. The fact that it's mostly successful on a first flight is actually quite remarkable in rocket development. These are incredibly complex machines, and early flights often end in spectacular failures. The article notes that there were issues, but the vehicle achieved many of its test objectives. Each iteration of Starship has shown improvements, and this third version incorporates lessons learned from earlier attempts. For the space industry, watching Starship development is like watching the future of space transportation being built in real time. Ars Technica also reports that first-generation Chromecast users have been stressed by devices suddenly failing this week. Many of these devices mysteriously stopped working, causing concern that Google had remotely killed them. However, it appears the devices are now back online. This incident raises important questions about the longevity of smart home devices and what happens when companies decide to end support. First-generation Chromecasts are about 13 years old at this point, which is ancient in technology terms, but many users reasonably expected them to keep working as long as the hardware functioned. The temporary failure and restoration suggests it may have been a server-side issue rather than a deliberate end-of-life decision, but it's a reminder that many of our devices depend on cloud services that could disappear at any time. Finally, there's an unusual but important story from TechCrunch with 153 points on Hacker News. Scammers are abusing an internal Microsoft account to send spam links. What makes this particularly concerning is that the messages appear to come from legitimate Microsoft systems, making them more likely to fool recipients. The scammers have apparently found a way to manipulate Microsoft's own infrastructure to send malicious messages that pass authentication checks. This is a sophisticated attack that exploits trust in the Microsoft brand and technical verification systems. It's a reminder that even messages that appear legitimate and pass technical checks need to be treated with skepticism. Microsoft is reportedly working to close the vulnerability, but the incident shows how attackers are constantly finding new ways to exploit trusted systems. Now for our security briefing, and we have significant vulnerabilities and incidents to cover today. Let's start with the CISA Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog, which has several critical additions. First and most urgent is CVE 2026-9082, added on May 22nd with a deadline of May 27th. That's just 3 days from now. This is a SQL injection vulnerability in Drupal core. Bleeping Computer is reporting that this critical SQL injection flaw is now being actively targeted in attacks. The vulnerability could allow attackers to achieve privilege escalation and remote code execution via specially crafted requests. If you're running Drupal sites, this needs immediate attention. SQL injection remains one of the most dangerous vulnerability types because it can give attackers complete control over your database, and from there, often your entire web server. The fact that CISA has given such a short remediation deadline indicates they're seeing active exploitation in the wild. Next, we have CVE 2025-34291, which affects Langflow. This was added on May 21st with a deadline of June 4th. It's an origin validation error vulnerability where an overly permissive CORS configuration combined with a refreshed token cookie configuration could be exploited. CORS, cross-origin resource sharing, is a security mechanism that controls how web pages from one domain can request resources from another domain. When misconfigured, it can allow attackers to make requests on behalf of authenticated users, potentially stealing session tokens or performing unauthorized actions. We also have CVE 2026-34926 affecting Trend Micro Apex 1, which Bleeping Computer is warning about. Added to the CISA catalog on May 21st, this is a directory traversal vulnerability that could allow a pre-authenticated local attacker to modify key system files. Trend Micro is warning that this zero-day vulnerability is being exploited in the wild. Directory traversal vulnerabilities allow attackers to access files and directories outside of the intended scope, and in this case, being able to modify key files could lead to privilege escalation or system compromise. The fact that it's a zero-day being actively exploited makes this particularly dangerous. Organizations running Apex 1 need to apply Trend Micro's patches immediately. CISA has also added several older vulnerabilities that are apparently seeing renewed exploitation. CVE 2008-4250 is a buffer overflow in Windows Server Service, yes, from 2008. CVE 2009-1537 affects Microsoft DirectX. CVE 2009-3459 is an Adobe Acrobat and Reader. We have CVE 2010-0249 and CVE 2010-0806, both affecting Internet Explorer with use after free vulnerabilities. The fact that these decades-old vulnerabilities are being added to the Kyiv catalog now suggests that attackers are scanning for unpatched legacy systems. This underscores the importance of not just applying current patches, but ensuring that old systems are either updated or properly isolated from the network. 2 current Microsoft Defender vulnerabilities have also been added. CVE 2026-41091, a link-following vulnerability allowing local privilege escalation, and CVE 2026-45498, which allows for denial of service. Even security software can have vulnerabilities, and these need to be patched just like any other software. Looking at the NVD recent CVEs, we're seeing some very old vulnerabilities being documented or recategorized. CVE 1999-0095 with a CVSS score of 10.0, the maximum, involves the debug command in SendMail being enabled, allowing attackers to execute commands as root. CVE 1999-0082, also a 10, involves an FTP daemon vulnerability allowing root access. These ancient vulnerabilities might seem irrelevant, but they're important for historical research and for organizations that might still be running very old systems. The fact that we're seeing CVSS scores being assigned or updated for these decades-old issues suggests ongoing work to catalog and understand the complete history of security vulnerabilities. Now let's turn to other security news. Krebs on Security has been extensively covering a major incident involving CISA itself. Lawmakers are demanding answers as CISA tries to contain a data leak. According to Krebs, a CISA administrator leaked AWS GovCloud keys on GitHub. This is extraordinarily serious. GovCloud is Amazon's cloud infrastructure specifically designed for government use with stricter security requirements. Exposing credentials to this infrastructure could potentially give attackers access to sensitive government systems. Schneier on Security has also covered the CISA security leak, noting the irony that the agency responsible for cybersecurity across the federal government suffered from a basic security mistake: credentials being pushed to a public code repository. This is a scenario that CISA itself has warned organizations about repeatedly. The incident highlights that even security-focused organizations can make operational security mistakes, and it emphasizes the importance of automated credential scanning and developer training. Krebs on Security reports on an international law enforcement success. The alleged Kimwolf botmaster known as Dort has been arrested and charged in both the US and Canada. Botnets remain one of the persistent threats on the internet, used for everything from DDoS attacks to credential stuffing to spam distribution. Taking down a botnet operator is challenging because they often operate across international boundaries and use sophisticated techniques to hide their identity. This arrest represents cooperation between US and Canadian law enforcement and demonstrates that despite the challenges, persistent investigation can identify and apprehend cybercriminals. Bleeping Computer has several important stories. They're reporting that Laravel Lang packages were hijacked to deploy credential-stealing malware. This is a supply chain attack targeting the PHP Laravel framework's language localization packages. Developers who installed or updated these packages would have inadvertently installed malware designed to steal credentials. Supply chain attacks like this are particularly insidious because developers trust the packages they install from official repositories. The NPM ecosystem has faced similar issues, and as Palo Alto Unit 42 notes in their updated report on the NPM threat landscape, monitoring supply chain attacks requires constant vigilance. Package managers are implementing better security measures, but the fundamental challenge remains. How do you verify that the code you're downloading is legitimate when that code can be updated by compromise of a maintainer's account? In Italy, authorities have disrupted Cinemagoal, a piracy app that wasn't just distributing copyrighted content, it was actively stealing streaming authentication codes from users. Bleeping Computer reports that this operation represents a sophisticated piracy scheme that turned users into victims. People who thought they were just getting free access to content were actually having their legitimate streaming service credentials stolen, which could then be sold or used for further criminal activity. The Netherlands has seized 800 servers of a hosting firm that was enabling cyberattacks, according to Bleeping Computer. This is one of the larger takedowns of so-called bulletproof hosting operations, which provide server infrastructure with minimal questions asked and limited cooperation with law enforcement. These hosting providers enable various types of cybercrime by providing infrastructure that's resistant to takedown attempts. The seizure of 800 servers suggests this was a significant operation, and the disruption will likely affect numerous criminal enterprises that relied on that infrastructure. Bleeping Computer also reports that 2 former U.S. executives have pleaded guilty to aiding tech support scammers. This is significant because it shows that some of the infrastructure enabling tech support scams, which primarily target elderly and vulnerable people, has involved US-based companies that knew or should have known what their customers were doing. Tech support scams remain a massive problem, with victims losing hundreds of millions of dollars annually to criminals who impersonate legitimate tech companies and convince victims they have computer problems requiring immediate paid support. Finally, Ubiquiti has patched 3 maximum severity vulnerabilities in Unify OS, according to Bleeping Computer. YubiKey's networking equipment is popular in both home and business environments, and Unify OS is the operating system that runs on many of their devices. Maximum severity vulnerabilities, those rated 10.0 on the CVSS scale, typically allow for complete system compromise. Given how widely deployed YubiKey equipment is, anyone using their products needs to apply these updates immediately. The vulnerabilities could potentially allow attackers to take complete control of network infrastructure, intercept traffic, or use compromised devices as pivot points for further attacks on the network. Schneier on Security has an article on macOS kernel memory corruption exploits, discussing research that found vulnerabilities in Apple's operating system kernel. Kernel vulnerabilities are particularly serious because the kernel has complete control over the system. Compromising it means an attacker can bypass all security mechanisms. Apple has patched these issues, but Schneier's discussion focuses on the broader implications for operating system security and the challenges of securing such complex code bases. Segment 6, AI and Machine Learning. Let's dive into some fascinating research coming out of the AI community this week. The archive preprint server has been busy, and there are several papers worth discussing. First up is a paper on tokenization titled Tokenization via Convex Relaxations. That's archive 2605.22821. The researchers here are taking a critical look at how we break down text into tokens for language models. Current methods like BPA and Unigram are greedy algorithms, meaning they make locally optimal choices without considering the global picture. This team is proposing a convex relaxation approach that could lead to more efficient tokenization strategies. Why does this matter? Well, better tokenization means more efficient models, lower computational costs, and potentially better language understanding. Every token counts when you're dealing with context windows and inference speed. Next, we have integrable elasticity via neural demand potentials, archive 2605.22820. This one's interesting because it's applying neural networks to retail demand modeling. The researchers propose something called the Integrable Context-Dependent Demand Network, or ICDN, which learns log demand functions for multi-product retail scenarios. This is AI meeting economics in a practical way. Retailers could use this to better predict demand across product lines, optimize inventory, and understand how context affects purchasing decisions. It's a reminder that AI isn't just about chatbots, it's transforming every industry that deals with complex data. There's a paper called Vector Policy Optimization, Training for Diversity Improves Test Time Search. That's archive 2605.22817. This research addresses a crucial challenge: getting language models to generalize to novel environments and work effectively inside inference scaling search procedures. They're looking at systems like AlphaEvolve and how training for diversity during the policy optimization phase can improve performance when the model encounters new situations at test time. This has implications for making AI systems more robust and adaptable, which is critical as we deploy these models in real-world scenarios where they'll face inputs the training data never anticipated. Moving to robotics and exploration, we have Remember to be Curious, Episodic Context and Persistent Worlds for 3D Exploration, archive 2605.22814. This paper tackles the problem of exploration in sparse reward, long-horizon tasks within 3D environments. The researchers are using curiosity-driven approaches with episodic memory to help agents learn useful behaviors. This is fundamental work for embodied AI, robots, and virtual agents that need to navigate and understand three-dimensional spaces. The episodic context approach means the agent can remember what it's seen before and use that to guide future exploration, much like how humans and animals learn to navigate new environments. Here's a theoretical contribution that caught my attention: the matching principle, a geometric theory of loss functions for nuisance-robust representation learning, archive 2605.22800. This paper presents a unified geometric framework for understanding robustness in machine learning. The researchers are addressing multiple challenges at once: domain adaptation, photometric and occlusion invariance, compositional generalization, temporal robustness, alignment safety, and classical robustness. They're proposing a matching principle that provides a theoretical foundation for designing loss functions that create robust representations. This is deep theoretical work that could influence how we train more reliable AI systems across the board. Finally, there's finite particle convergence rates for conservative and non-conservative drifting models. Archive 2605.22795. This paper analyzes a conservative drifting method for one-step generative modeling. They're looking at alternatives to displacement-based drifting and proving convergence rates for finite particle systems. This is relevant to the ongoing work in diffusion models and flow-based generative approaches. Understanding convergence properties helps us build more efficient training procedures and better generative models overall. On the broader AI industry front, we're continuing to see rapid development across multiple companies. Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google are all iterating on their models, with particular focus on extended context windows, better reasoning capabilities, and multimodal understanding. The open-source community remains vibrant as well, with frameworks for building agent systems continuing to mature. We're seeing increased interest in agentic AI systems that can plan, use tools, and work toward goals autonomously rather than just responding to prompts. The conversation around AI regulation and safety continues to heat up. Various jurisdictions are working on frameworks to govern AI deployment, and there's ongoing debate about the right balance between enabling innovation and ensuring responsible development. Keep an eye on this space. The policies developed now will shape the AI landscape for years to come. Segment 7, HOMLAB and Infrastructure. Let's talk about what's happening in the homelab and infrastructure world. There's always something new to deploy, configure, or optimize. GitHub Trending is showing some interesting projects this week. One that stands out is something called Silk from ClickHouse. It's an open-source cooperative fiber scheduler. ClickHouse is already well known for its high-performance columnar database system, and this fiber scheduler is designed to improve task scheduling and resource management. For those running data-intensive applications in their home lab or production environments, efficient scheduling can make a significant difference in performance. This is particularly relevant if you're running analytical workloads or dealing with complex query processing. Looking at what's popular on Hacker News and Lobsters, there's a fun story about a Wayland compositor implemented as a mod in Minecraft. Yes, you read that correctly. Someone built a working Wayland compositor inside Minecraft. It's a technical flex more than anything practical, but it demonstrates a deep understanding of both the Minecraft modding system and the Wayland protocol. Projects like this remind us that the best way to learn technology deeply is often to do something completely impractical with it. Speaking of display technology, there's discussion about the Hershey textual vector font format over on Lobsters. For those not familiar, Hershey fonts are a collection of vector fonts developed in the 1960s. They're defined as strokes rather than filled shapes, which makes them ideal for pen plotters and vector displays. There's something charming about these old formats finding new life in modern hobbyist projects. If you're into retro computing or building custom displays, these fonts are worth exploring. On the networking front, several projects deserve attention. Tailscale and WireGuard continue to dominate discussions about modern VPN and mesh networking solutions. The appeal is obvious: simple setup, strong security, and the ability to connect your devices wherever they are without complex firewall configurations. If you haven't set up a WireGuard VPN or tried Tailscale for your home lab, it's worth the time. Being able to securely access your home infrastructure from anywhere without exposing services directly to the internet is incredibly valuable. For those running OPNsense or other firewall solutions, keeping up with updates is critical. We're seeing more sophisticated attacks targeting network infrastructure, and having a properly configured and updated firewall is your first line of defense. OPNsense continues to be a solid open-source option, offering enterprise-grade features without the enterprise price tag. Make sure you're running intrusion detection, keeping your rules tight, and reviewing logs regularly. On the container and orchestration side, Docker and Kubernetes remain the standard for home lab deployments. If you're running multiple services, containerization just makes life easier: better resource isolation, simpler updates, and the ability to quickly spin up or tear down services. Kubernetes might seem like overkill for a home lab, but K3s makes it surprisingly approachable. The learning curve pays dividends if you're in the tech industry or just want to understand how modern infrastructure works. Proxmox continues to be a favorite for virtualization in the home lab community. The combination of KVM for virtual machines and LXC for containers, all managed through a clean web interface, is hard to beat. Recent versions have added better support for clustered deployments, improved backup systems, and better integration with various storage backends. If you're still running standalone hypervisors or juggling multiple solutions, consolidating to Proxmox is worth considering. Unraid deserves mention too, especially for folks focused on storage and media serving. The flexible array system, where you can mix drive sizes and add capacity incrementally, appeals to HomeLab users who don't want to commit to a rigid RAID configuration up front. The Docker integration is solid, and the Community Applications plugin makes deploying services straightforward. Home Assistant continues its impressive trajectory. The home automation platform just keeps getting better, with more integrations, improved automation capabilities, and better UI customization. If you've been putting off consolidating your smart home devices under a single, locally controlled platform, Home Assistant is the answer. The Matter protocol support is improving, which should make device compatibility even better going forward. Now let's talk about some resources from Ahead Incorporated. Over at ahead.com, there are several resources worth checking out. There's a piece on reimagining IT operations with agentic AI. This explores how AI agents can transform how we manage infrastructure and respond to incidents. The concept of agentic AI in operations is moving from theoretical to practical, and Ahead's breakdown covers real implementation considerations. They've also published content on building production-ready AI factories. If your organization is moving beyond experimentation into production AI deployments, this covers the infrastructure, processes, and team structures needed to succeed. It's not just about GPUs and model training. It's about the entire pipeline from data preparation through deployment and monitoring. Another resource worth reviewing is their executive playbook for liquid-cooled infrastructure for AI. As AI workloads push power densities higher, traditional air cooling hits its limits. Liquid cooling is becoming necessary for dense GPU deployments, and this playbook covers what decision makers need to know about making the transition. For those following the Broadcom VMware situation, Ahead has content on turning Broadcom VCF and VKS entitlements into a modern private cloud. The licensing changes have left many organizations reevaluating their virtualization strategy, and this resource provides practical guidance on making the most of what you have or planning a migration. Finally, there's a piece on ServiceNow Knowledge 2026, highlighting what actually matters from the conference and what actions to take. If you're in the IT service management space, ServiceNow remains a major player, and staying current with their platform evolution is important. The infrastructure landscape continues to evolve rapidly. Between containers, orchestration, AI workloads, and changing vendor strategies, there's always something new to learn and implement. The good news is the Home Lab is the perfect place to experiment, break things, and build skills without the pressure of production consequences. Segment 8, Science and Space. Let's shift gears and look up, both literally at space and more broadly at what's happening in science. NASA's breaking news feed has some updates worth discussing. First, they're putting out a call for creatives to help with mission storytelling. NASA is looking for help illuminating their various missions through creative content, which speaks to the ongoing challenge of communicating complex science and engineering to the public. If you're a content creator, photographer, videographer, or writer with an interest in space, this might be worth looking into. There's also coverage set for a Roscosmos spacewalk outside the International Space Station. These joint operations between NASA and Roscosmos continue despite geopolitical tensions on the ground, which is a testament to the cooperative nature of the ISS program. The space station remains one of the few areas where international cooperation continues relatively smoothly. NASA is also announcing plans to compete the contract for Jet Propulsion Laboratory Management. JPL, located in Pasadena, California, has been managed by Caltech since 1958, but NASA is opening up the management contract for competition. This is significant because JPL manages many of NASA's most prominent missions, including Mars rovers, deep space probes, and Earth science satellites. The outcome of this competition could influence the direction of planetary science for years to come. Ars Technica is reporting that SpaceX's Starship V3 had a mostly successful first flight, though it's still described as a work in progress. Starship continues to iterate rapidly, with SpaceX learning from each test and incorporating improvements quickly. The V3 variant includes design changes based on previous flights, and the fact that it's mostly successful on the first attempt is impressive. This rapid iteration approach, where you fly, learn, fail fast, and improve, stands in stark contrast to traditional aerospace development cycles. Whether this approach proves sustainable long-term remains to be seen, but it's certainly producing rapid progress. The same publication reports that 2 Space Shuttle-era spacewalkers are entering the Astronaut Hall of Fame. These inductions recognize the contributions of astronauts who helped build and maintain the ISS during the shuttle program. The shuttle era represented a particular approach to spaceflight, reusable but expensive, complex but capable. Those astronauts conducted some of the most challenging spacewalks ever performed, assembling structures in orbit that will likely operate for decades. On a more concerning note, Ars reports that 4 Russian satellites are now within striking distance of an ICEYE radar satellite. ICEYE is a Finnish company that operates synthetic aperture radar satellites, and they've been providing imagery to support Ukraine during the ongoing conflict. The proximity of Russian satellites raises obvious concerns about potential interference or worse. Space is increasingly becoming a domain of geopolitical competition, and the question of rules and norms for satellite interactions remains largely unresolved. In health and science news, there's an Ebola outbreak that's now the 3rd largest recorded and described as spreading rapidly. This is deeply concerning. Ebola outbreaks are particularly challenging to contain due to the virus's high mortality rate, the stigma around infection, and the infrastructure challenges in affected regions. According to reports, suspected Ebola patients have escaped after treatment tents were set on fire in Congo, which complicates containment efforts significantly. Public health officials are working to control spread, but it's a reminder that infectious disease remains a serious global threat. Travel restrictions are being implemented, and medical supplies are reportedly running low. This situation deserves more attention than it's currently getting. In technology policy news that intersects with science, there are reports about the U.S. scrambling to stop internet users from recreating dead pilots' voices using AI. This stems from crash investigation documents that include voice recordings, which people have used to train AI voice models. It's an ethically fraught situation. Should these recordings be restricted? What about the families of the deceased? What about safety investigations that rely on transparency? There's a balance between protecting privacy and dignity versus ensuring thorough accident investigation. This is one of many challenging questions AI is forcing us to confront. Over in tech industry science, there's continued work on advanced manufacturing and semiconductor development. The push for domestic chip production in the US and Europe continues, with various initiatives aimed at reducing dependence on Asian manufacturing. This has implications for everything from consumer electronics to defense systems. In climate science, researchers continue monitoring weather patterns and long-term trends. The weather data from OpenMeteo shows we're looking at temperatures in the mid to upper 70s this week, with overcast conditions and some rain midweek. It's useful to have local weather, but the broader climate story remains concerning, with various indicators suggesting continued warming trends globally. Space weather is relatively quiet right now, with no major solar events threatening satellites or power grids. But the sun moves in cycles, and we're not far from a solar maximum, so keeping an eye on space weather forecasts is worthwhile for anyone dependent on satellite communications or power infrastructure. The intersection of space, science, and technology continues to produce both amazing achievements and serious challenges. From Mars rovers to Ebola outbreaks, from international cooperation in orbit to satellite confrontations, we live in a complex and interconnected world. Staying informed about these developments helps us understand both the opportunities and risks ahead. Segment 9, Business and Economy. Let's wrap up with a look at business and economic news affecting the tech sector and beyond. Bloomberg is reporting that Secretary of State Rubio says there's good news likely on the Strait of Hormuz situation, with Iran talks continuing. Trump has been claiming that a deal is largely negotiated, but Iran is pushing back, saying those claims are far from reality. The Strait of Hormuz is critical for global oil shipments, and any disruption there affects energy prices worldwide, which in turn impacts everything from transportation costs to manufacturing. An LNG tanker reportedly exited Hormuz heading for India for the first time since the conflict began, which is a positive sign if sustained. The European Central Bank is facing pressure to potentially raise rates as the Iran conflict feeds into inflation concerns, according to Bloomberg. This is a delicate balance. Raise rates too much and you risk stifling economic growth, but let inflation run and you erode purchasing power. Central banks around the world are navigating similar challenges as geopolitical conflicts, supply chain issues, and shifting energy markets create economic turbulence. In more concerning health news from a business perspective, Bloomberg reports that Ebola is spreading across Congo as flights are halted and medical supplies run low. Beyond the human tragedy, disease outbreaks have significant economic impacts through disrupted trade, reduced productivity, and the costs of containment and treatment. The international community's response to this outbreak will test global health infrastructure and coordination. Bloomberg also reports that South Korea's day traders, described as the world's most fervent, are getting access to new risky tools. Retail trading has exploded globally over the past few years, enabled by apps and platforms that make trading accessible to anyone with a smartphone. But greater access doesn't mean better outcomes, and there are legitimate concerns about retail investors taking on excessive risk, especially with leveraged and derivative products. Regulators face the challenge of protecting consumers without being paternalistic or stifling market access. In the tech industry specifically, we're continuing to see a mixed picture. Some companies are hiring, particularly in AI and infrastructure roles, while others are conducting layoffs or freezing headcount. The AWS article on Hacker News titled Amazon Web Services 4 Years and Out describes someone's experience and departure from Oz. These personal accounts offer insight into corporate culture, burnout, and the realities of working at major tech companies. The up or out culture, the intensity, the compensation packages, these factors shape who stays in big tech and who leaves for startups, consultancies, or other industries. The housing market remains challenging, with interest rates elevated and home prices still high in many markets. This particularly affects tech workers who often cluster in high-cost areas like San Francisco, Seattle, Austin, and increasingly secondary tech hubs. The dream of homeownership feels increasingly distant for many younger tech workers, even those earning solid salaries. Inflation has moderated from its peaks but remains above historical norms. Grocery prices, energy costs, and services continue to feel expensive for most people. The disconnect between macroeconomic indicators that might look reasonably healthy and the lived experience of many households creates political and social tension. In the AI industry, investment continues to pour in despite questions about near-term monetization for many applications. Companies are betting that AI will be transformative, and they're positioning themselves accordingly. Whether the returns justify the investment remains to be seen, but the spending is reshaping the infrastructure and semiconductor industries regardless. The broader stock market has been volatile, reacting to geopolitical news, economic data, and corporate earnings. Tech stocks remain a significant portion of market capitalization, meaning the fortunes of a handful of large technology companies significantly influence overall market performance. Looking at supply chains, we're seeing continued efforts to diversify and reduce concentration risk. The pandemic and various geopolitical tensions have highlighted the dangers of overly centralized production, particularly in semiconductors and other critical components. This reshoring and friendshoring trend has significant implications for manufacturing costs, trade relationships, and geopolitical influence. The business and economic picture remains complex and uncertain. Geopolitical tensions, technological change, climate impacts, and demographic shifts are all influencing markets and business decisions. For those of us in tech, staying informed about these broader trends helps contextualize the industry changes we experience directly. Segment 10, outro, that brings us to the end of today's episode of the Clovis Brief. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the latest in AI research and the ongoing challenges in cybersecurity to the exciting developments in space exploration and the complex economic landscape we're all navigating. Tomorrow, we'll be diving into some interesting developments in network infrastructure and taking a closer look at some regulatory changes that could affect how we deploy and manage technology. Plus, I've got my eye on some interesting developments in the local tech scene that are worth discussing. Thank you for spending your Sunday with me. Whether you're relaxing on this Memorial Day weekend, tinkering with a homelab project, or catching up on the week's news, I appreciate you tuning in. Stay curious, stay secure, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. This is the Clovis Brief.